On a distant planet in the galaxy, a peaceful alien species was in grave danger. Their homeworld, a green and blue planet full of life, was under attack. The attackers were not just another rival species. They were merciless invaders, well-equipped and powerful. For weeks, the alien cities had been falling one by one. The enemy ships filled the skies, their weapons tearing through buildings, crushing everything in their path. The alien species, called the Exathians, had never experienced such an enemy before. The Exathians were peaceful by nature, preferring to talk and find solutions rather than fight. They had no standing army, no weapons designed for war, and no defense against the ruthless invaders. The Exathians had lived for centuries in harmony with each other and their planet. They focused on science, culture, and knowledge. But now all of that was at risk. Their cities were burning, and their people were fleeing into the wilderness. Desperation filled the air. The Exathians knew they needed help, but they had no idea where to turn. They were not a violent species, and most other civilizations in the galaxy saw them as weak or insignificant. They had no powerful allies, no friends who could come to their aid. So, they decided to send out a distress signal, a message to the stars, hoping someone, anyone, would hear their cry for help. For days, the Exathians sent out the signal. It traveled across the galaxy, bouncing from one relay station to the next, hoping to reach someone who would listen. They sent messages to the Galactic Council, a group of the most powerful species in the galaxy, asking for help, but there was no reply. The Exathians waited anxiously, hoping that someone would care enough to help them. But the reply never came. The Galactic Council, a collection of various species who governed the galaxy, had long been ignoring the Exathians. To the Council, the Exathians were not important enough to bother with. They were seen as a peaceful, small species with no real military power. Many council members had their own problems, their own wars to deal with. Why should they help the Exathians? The council had grown tired of their requests, viewing them as a nuisance. In their eyes, the Exathians weren't worth saving. As the days passed, the Exathians grew desperate. Their planet was being torn apart, and they had no one to turn to. The enemy forces were getting closer to their capital city, and the Exathians feared it would fall next. They needed help, but no one was answering their calls. Then, in their darkest hour, the Exathians made a decision. They had heard rumors about Earth. Earth was known throughout the galaxy for one thing: its people, the humans. Humans had a reputation for being cruel, aggressive, and violent. Stories of their wars and battles were spread far and wide. The galaxy feared them. But the Exathians had no other choice. They had to take the risk. With no other options, the Exathians decided to send a message to Earth, hoping the humans would answer. It was a long shot. The Exathians weren't even sure if the humans would hear their message, let alone help them. But they had no other choice. The enemy was closing in, and the Exathians were about to lose everything. They sent the message, using all their resources. The message was simple: "We are under attack. We need help. Please, help us." It was their last hope. The Exathians waited, fearing that their message would be ignored just like the others. Days passed, and still there was no response. Then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Exathians received a signal. It was from Earth. At first, the Exathians could hardly believe it. The message was clear: "We've received your distress signal. Help is on the way." The Exathians could hardly believe their ears. The humans were actually answering. The species they had heard so much about, known for their cruelty and aggression, were willing to help. But why? What did the humans want in return? The Exathians had no idea, but they knew they couldn't question it. This was their only chance. As the Exathians prepared for the arrival of the humans, they couldn't help but wonder what kind of help they would receive. Would the humans show mercy, or would they arrive with violence, as they were known to do? The Scythians could only wait and hope that the humans would be their saviors, not their destroyers. The Scythians sat in their darkened command center, staring at the screens in front of them. Their planet was falling apart. The invaders had reached the outer cities, and the capital was only days away from being attacked. Every moment felt like it could be their last. The alien race that had once been proud and peaceful now felt helpless. Their beautiful cities, full of green fields and shimmering lakes, were turning to dust. What had once been a thriving, vibrant world was now a battlefield. The leader of the Scythians, Queen Lyra, sat quietly, her face filled with worry. She had never imagined that it would come to this. She had spent her life teaching her people the values of peace and diplomacy, yet now it seemed like those ideals were failing them. The enemy was relentless, showing no mercy. They had destroyed their cities, captured their people, and left a trail of death behind them. All her efforts to avoid war had been in vain. It was a harsh reality, but one that she could no longer deny. "We need help," Queen Lyra whispered, her voice almost breaking. Her advisors were all in the room, but no one spoke. They all knew what she meant. They had sent messages to every corner of the galaxy, asking for help, but none had come. Not from the Galactic Council, not from any of the other powerful species in the galaxy. No one cared about the Scythians. They were too weak, too small, too peaceful. But there was one last option, one last chance for survival: the humans. For days, the Scythians had debated whether to contact Earth. The humans were known throughout the galaxy for their cruelty and aggression. They were feared by many, even hated by some. But the Scythians knew one thing: the humans were strong. They were warriors, and in this moment, strength was exactly what they needed. "Send the message," Queen Lyra said with a sense of finality. The room went quiet, and then one of her advisors, a young officer named Talon, nodded. He quickly moved to a console, entering the coordinates for the Earth communication network. The Scythians had never contacted Earth directly before, and they weren't even sure if the humans would receive the message. But they had no choice. They had to try. Talon pressed the button, and a signal was sent into space, traveling across the stars toward Earth. The message was simple, urgent, and filled with desperation. "We are under attack. Our world is dying. Please, help us." Once the message was sent, all that Scythians could do was wait. They had done everything they could to survive, but now it was in the hands of the humans. Would they answer, or would they turn their backs, like everyone else had? Days passed. The enemy continued to advance, and the Scythians' fear grew with each passing hour. Queen Lyra found it difficult to sleep, her mind racing with worries about her people. She thought of her family, her children, and the millions of innocent lives that were at risk. Could the humans really help? Or had they made a mistake by sending the message at all? Then, on the fourth day, the unexpected happened. A reply came. At first, it was just a simple message: "We've received your distress signal. Help is on the way." The Scythians could hardly believe it. The humans were coming. After all the rejection, all the silence from the rest of the galaxy, the humans were willing to help. Queen Lyra blinked in disbelief. This was their last hope. Could it really be true? The message continued: "Prepare your defenses. We'll be there soon." The Scythians were filled with a strange mix of relief and fear. The relief was obvious. Help was on the way. But the fear was just as strong. The humans were known for their aggressive tactics, their ruthless fighting style. They had a reputation for being brutal and merciless. What kind of help would the Scythians receive? Would the humans come as allies or as conquerors? Despite their doubts, Queen Lyra ordered her people to prepare. They had no choice but to trust that the humans would help. It was the only chance they had left. The Scythians had no time to question the methods or motives of the humans. They had to fight back, or their world would be lost. The next few days felt like an eternity. The enemy forces were getting closer to the capital, and the Scythians could hear the sounds of battle in the distance. The rumbling of explosions, the crackling of weapons in the air. It was all too much. It was hard to believe that help was coming, that someone would arrive to save them. But finally, the day came. The Scythians' long-range sensors picked up the first signs of human ships entering their atmosphere. Queen Lyra stood in the control room, her heart racing. She stared out the window as the sky turned dark with the shadows of massive ships. The humans had arrived. At that moment, the Scythians knew their fate was no longer in their own hands. They had done everything they could. Now, all they could do was wait and see what the humans would do. The Scythians had waited for days, their hearts filled with a mixture of hope and fear. The enemy was getting closer, their forces marching forward without mercy. The Scythian cities were almost completely destroyed, and the last remaining survivors had retreated into underground bunkers. Queen Lyra, once hopeful and strong, now felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. Would the humans really come? Or had she made a mistake by reaching out to them? The message they had sent to Earth was simple, filled with desperation. We are under attack. Our world is dying. Please, help us. Now, as she waited, Queen Lyra couldn't shake the fear that the humans would ignore their plea, just like everyone else had. The galaxy had turned its back on them, leaving them to fight a battle they could never win alone. But then, without warning, the sky above the Scythians' planet began to change. The stars seemed to flicker, and the atmosphere hummed with energy. The sensors in the control room suddenly lit up, and Talon, one of Queen Lyra's most trusted advisors, quickly checked the readings. Queen Lyra, Talon called out, his voice filled with disbelief. The humans, they're here. They've arrived. Queen Lyra felt a rush of relief and anxiety all at once. She had no idea what to expect from the humans. She had heard stories of their ruthless reputation, of their wars and battles fought with no mercy. But they had promised help, and now they were here. The Scythians' fate was in their hands. Outside, the sky was now filled with massive human ships. They were enormous, their dark shapes blocking out the stars. The ships looked like something out of a nightmare, with sharp, angular designs and glowing red lights. It was clear that the humans were not here to make peace. These were warships built for battle, and they were ready for anything. The Scythians watched from the ground as the human fleet descended, their engines roaring as they broke through the atmosphere. The ships landed in strategic positions, forming a circle around the remaining Scythian cities. The air shook with the sound of their arrival, and for a moment, it felt as if the very ground beneath them was trembling. Was this what they had been waiting for? Was this the kind of help the humans would offer? Talon turned to Queen Lyra, his face pale with fear. What will they do? Will they destroy us too? Queen Lyra didn't know what to say. She had no answers. She had heard that humans fought to win, that they fought with an intensity that could break the will of any opponent. But would they show mercy? Would they protect the Scythians, or would they take advantage of their weakness? Then something unexpected happened. The leader of the human fleet, a tall and commanding figure, stepped down from one of the ships. He was dressed in dark armor, with a cold, unwavering expression. His eyes scanned the Scythians, and his soldiers, clad in black uniforms, followed him closely. The sight of him sent a chill through Queen Lyra's heart. This man didn't look like someone who would show kindness. He looked like a warrior, prepared for battle. But then, the human leader spoke. His voice was deep, yet calm, carrying a sense of authority. We've received your message. You're not alone. We're here to help. Queen Lyra couldn't believe her ears. The humans were not here to conquer them, to destroy them. They were here to help. The human leader continued, his voice steady and strong. We know what you're facing, he said, and we're not afraid of your enemy. We'll fight beside you, not just for you. Together, we'll take back your world. The Scythians were stunned. They had expected the worst, but the humans were offering them something they had never imagined. A chance to fight back. The humans were not here to rule over them, nor were they here to make demands. They were here to stand beside them, to help them win their planet back. "Thank you," Queen Lyra said, her voice shaky but filled with gratitude. "We don't deserve this, but we are grateful. You've given us a chance." The human leader nodded, his face stern. "You don't need to thank us. We do what we must to protect those who can't protect themselves." As the Scythians watched, the humans began to prepare. They deployed their forces, setting up defensive lines around the city and remaining strongholds. The human soldiers were quick, efficient, and unafraid. Their weapons were powerful, their technology far beyond anything the Scythians had ever seen. Yet there was a calmness to them, a sense of control that the Scythians could only admire. The battle was about to begin, and for the first time in weeks, the Scythians felt a spark of hope. The humans might have a reputation for being cruel, but they had shown up when everyone else had turned their backs. They had come not to conquer, but to protect. And in that moment, the Scythians realized that maybe, just maybe, the humans were the allies they had been waiting for all along. The sky above the Scythian planet grew darker as the human fleet positioned itself. For hours, the massive ships hovered over the war-torn surface, their engines glowing with bright, angry red lights. The sight of them was overwhelming. To the Scythians, they were like giants, cold and unyielding, but they were their only hope. It was hard for the Scythians to believe it. Help had actually come, not from the galaxy's council, not from any of the powerful species they had begged for aid. The humans, the race that had been called cruel and merciless, were here, and they were not leaving. Queen Lyra stood in the command center, her eyes fixed on the huge ships. Her heart raced. This was the moment that could change everything. As the leader of her people, she had never thought they would need to rely on others for survival. She had always believed in peace and diplomacy. But now, as she looked up at the human fleet, she realized that sometimes survival meant fighting. And she could only pray that the humans would fight with them, not just for them. "We're ready," Talon, one of her trusted officers, said quietly from behind her. His voice was nervous, and Queen Lyra could hear the tension in it. Queen Lyra turned to face him, her expression serious. "I hope we are," she said, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "The enemy is not far from us. We have no time to waste." The Scythians had spent days hiding in their bunkers, planning and hoping. The enemy was still advancing, destroying everything in their path. It was only a matter of time before they reached the last city, where the Scythians had gathered their remaining forces. They had tried everything they could, but there was no stopping the invaders alone. That's when they called the humans, desperate for any kind of assistance. Talon nodded and turned back to his console, his fingers flying over the buttons. The systems powered up, and the communications channels began to hum. On the screens, the first human ships began to move. The fleet was positioning itself for battle. "We have them," Talon said, his voice more confident now. "The humans are already on the move." Queen Lyra nodded, but her stomach twisted with uncertainty. She had to trust the humans. She had to believe that they would keep their promise to protect her people. But would they? The sound of engines filled the air, and from the window of the command center, Queen Lyra saw the first wave of human soldiers descending from the ships. They were not like the Scythian soldiers. The humans did not wear bright uniforms or carry elegant weapons. Their gear was dark, practical, and intimidating. They moved with purpose, their faces hard and focused. As the humans touched down, their leader, the tall man Queen Lyra had spoken to earlier, stepped forward. His expression was calm, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Prepare for battle," he commanded, his words carrying authority. "We take no prisoners." The Scythians felt a chill run through them. The human leader's words were sharp, unyielding. There was no room for hesitation, no mercy in his voice. These were warriors, not diplomats. This was the kind of help they had called for, but now, standing side by side with them, the Scythians could not help but feel the weight of what they had invited onto their world. But there was no turning back now. "We're with you," Queen Lyra said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady, though her heart was still heavy with doubt. "We fight together." The human leader nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a cold, determined gaze. "We fight to win," he said simply. With that, the human fleet began its assault. Ships descended from the sky, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. The first blast hit the enemy's front lines, sending shockwaves through the air. The ground shook as explosions erupted, and the sounds of battle filled the sky. The human ships fired again and again, tearing through the enemy's defenses like paper. The Scythian soldiers joined in, their own weapons firing in unison with the humans. For the first time in weeks, Queen Lyra felt a spark of hope. The humans were not holding back. They were fighting with all their strength, their weapons far more powerful than anything the Scythians had ever seen. The enemies that had once seemed unstoppable were now being pushed back, their ranks falling apart under the relentless assault. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The enemy forces were still strong, and they had retreated to their stronghold, preparing for another attack. Queen Lyra watched from her command center as human ships circled the skies above. The humans had proven their strength and skill, but now she feared they would be too aggressive. The human tactics were unlike anything the Scythians had seen before. They fought with ruthless precision, using methods that seemed cruel, even to the Scythians. The human leader, Colonel Vance, had called a meeting with Queen Lyra and her advisors. They gathered around a large table. The map of the battlefield spread out before them. The room was silent, tense with uncertainty. Colonel Vance stood at the head of the table, his arms crossed and his expression stern. "We've made good progress, but we need to finish this quickly," Colonel Vance said. "We can't afford to waste any time. The longer we wait, the stronger they'll become." Queen Lyra nodded, but her thoughts were clouded with doubt. "We need to be careful. If we push too hard, we risk losing everything. Our people are already weakened from the first wave of the battle." Colonel Vance's gaze hardened. "Careful? We don't have the luxury of being careful. We have to hit them hard and fast. If we show mercy, they'll come back stronger. We can't let that happen." His words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The Scythians were not used to such brutal thinking. Their society had always believed in diplomacy, in peaceful solutions to problems. But the humans saw the galaxy in a different way. To them, mercy was a weakness, and hesitation could lead to disaster. "Let me show you how we do things," Colonel Vance said, his voice cold. He motioned for his officers to bring up the holographic display of the enemy's stronghold. It was heavily fortified, surrounded by thick walls, and defended by thousands of soldiers. It seemed like an impossible task to break through. "This is how we'll do it," Colonel Vance continued. "We'll target their water supply first, cut off their access to resources, and they'll be forced to come out of hiding. Then we hit them where it hurts. We'll take their leaders, cut the head off the snake, and the rest will fall." The Scythians stared at the display, shocked. This was not a strategy they were used to. Attacking vital resources, targeting leaders, these were the tactics of a ruthless force. It seemed cruel, almost inhumane. But Queen Lyra knew that if they didn't take action, they would lose everything. "We'll follow your plan," Queen Lyra said, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. "But we must ensure we don't destroy everything in our path. We need to leave them with a chance to rebuild." Colonel Vance's expression didn't change. "There's no time for rebuilding. We do this, and we end it. That's the only way they'll stop coming for you." The plan was set in motion quickly. The human fleet moved out, and the Scythian soldiers followed close behind. They approached the enemy's stronghold under the cover of darkness, their ships moving silently through the night. As they reached the outskirts of the enemy camp, Colonel Vance gave the order, "Begin the attack." The first blast hit the enemy's water supply, and the explosion was massive. Water flowed into the streets, flooding the area and cutting off the enemy's most vital resource. Within minutes, the enemy's forces began to panic. They had no choice but to move out of their safe zone, trying to find new sources of water. The human ships moved in swiftly, their weapons firing with deadly accuracy. The first wave of human soldiers stormed the enemy's defenses, overwhelming them with speed and force. The enemy was caught off guard, unable to respond in time. The humans had already planned every move, anticipating the enemy's reaction before they even made it. As the battle raged on, Queen Lyra stood on the bridge of her ship, watching in silence. The humans were everywhere, pushing the enemy back at every turn. It was hard to believe how quickly things had changed. The Scythians had fought for years, always with hope for a peaceful solution. But now, they were part of a war that was anything but peaceful. At one point, the humans began to use a tactic that made Queen Lyra's stomach turn. They captured a group of enemy soldiers and lined them up. Colonel Vance gave the order to leave no survivors, and the humans executed the prisoners without hesitation. It was a brutal display of power, a message sent to the enemy that they would not be spared. The Scythians watched in horror, but they couldn't argue with the results. The enemy's morale was shattered. They couldn't believe the humans would go so far. The next day, the enemy leaders surrendered. They had no choice. They were broken, their forces scattered, and their supplies destroyed. The humans had won, but the cost was high. The Scythians were left to process what they had witnessed. The humans had saved them, but their methods were harsh. Was it worth it? Could the Scythians live with the brutality of the humans' tactics? Queen Lyra stood before her people, her mind heavy with the decisions made in the heat of battle. "We owe them our lives," she said, her voice solemn. "But we must remember what we've seen. Sometimes survival means making difficult choices, and sometimes those choices will haunt us. The humans had helped them win, but at what cost? The Scythians would never forget the cruel tactics they had witnessed, but they also knew one thing. They were alive, and they owed it all to the humans who had come to their rescue. The days following the battle were filled with tension. The Scythians had won, but their victory felt hollow. They had been saved, but they had also witnessed the full force of the humans' tactics. These tactics, though brutal and unyielding, had brought results. But what about the cost? Was it worth it? These questions lingered in the minds of the Scythians. The alien leaders, once confident in their power, began to feel the weight of the situation. They had underestimated the humans. They had called them cruel, savage, and merciless. But now, after seeing them in action, they were starting to realize that the humans were not just powerful. They were something else. They were a force of nature. It wasn't just their weapons or their tactics. It was their resilience. The humans had come to their aid without hesitation. They had thrown themselves into battle with a determination the Scythians had never seen before. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, the humans had not flinched. They had pushed through every challenge, never slowing down, never backing away. The aliens had never faced an enemy like this. On the Scythian homeworld, a meeting was called. Alien leaders from across the galaxy gathered, their faces grim as they discussed the human threat. They could no longer ignore the humans. They had to understand them, or they would be destroyed. "We cannot afford to underestimate them anymore," one of the alien leaders, a tall reptilian creature named Zerak, said in a deep, growling voice. "The humans are not like us. They do not think like us." The other leaders nodded in agreement, their eyes full of concern. They had all seen the human strength. It wasn't just their firepower. It wasn't just their tactics. It was their spirit. The humans had a will to fight that could not be broken. And that terrified the aliens. Zerak continued, "They've shown us what they're capable of. But we cannot let fear control us. We need to strike first, or we will be crushed." "But what if we fail?" Another leader, a smaller insectoid alien, asked. "What if the humans decide to wipe us out, as they did with the invaders?" "That's the risk we take," Zarek replied coldly. But we must strike while we still have the chance. Meanwhile, on the Scythian homeworld, Queen Lyra was having her own doubts. She had trusted the humans to help her people, but what would happen next? What if the humans decided they wanted more? What if they came to take control of the galaxy? Queen Lyra had seen the power of the human fleet, the fearsome weapons they wielded, and the cold determination in their eyes. But she also knew that the humans had saved them. Without them, the Scythians would be no more. There was no denying that. And yet, as she walked through the halls of the palace, a strange unease filled her heart. She had seen the brutality of the humans' tactics. They had executed prisoners without hesitation, showing no mercy, no compassion. How long before the humans turned that same power on the Scythians? As she entered the meeting room, she saw the human leader, Colonel Vance, standing at the table. His face was serious, his posture rigid. He had come to report on the status of the victory and the next steps for the human fleet. His voice was calm but firm as he spoke to Queen Lyra. "We've secured the region, but there are still pockets of resistance," Colonel Vance said. "We'll need to launch another assault soon. It's the only way to ensure their defeat." Queen Lyra looked at him, studying his face. There was no warmth there, no kindness, just the cold, hard eyes of a soldier who had seen too much. She had come to respect the humans for their strength, but now she wondered if that strength would one day be used against her people. "And what happens after the fighting stops?" Queen Lyra asked carefully. "What do the humans want? What do they expect from us?" Colonel Vance didn't hesitate. "We don't want anything from you, Your Majesty. We've done what we came to do. The galaxy is dangerous, and we want to make sure you can survive in it. But you don't just fight to survive, do you?" Queen Lyra asked. "You fight to win. And once you win, what then?" Colonel Vance's eyes flickered for a moment, as if he was searching for an answer. Then, with a small, almost imperceptible shrug, he spoke. "We win, and then we move on to the next fight." It was that simple. For the humans, the battle was never really over. Even after victory, they were always ready for the next challenge. This was a mindset that the Scythians and most other alien species could not understand. The Scythians had always sought peace, always hoped for harmony. But the humans were different. They thrived in conflict. They were built for it. Queen Lyra looked away, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She couldn't deny the strength of the humans, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that they were not allies to be trusted. They were a force that could not be controlled. Meanwhile, the alien leaders across the galaxy were beginning to make their own decisions. They could no longer pretend that the humans were not a threat. They could no longer believe that their own strength could protect them from what the humans were capable of. The aliens were finally beginning to understand. Humanity was not just a race of fighters. They were a force of nature. And that made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The war had finally ended. The Scythians were victorious, but the cost was high. The galaxy was still shaking from the violence and the aftermath of the conflict. The once proud Scythian Empire was forever changed. And yet, as the dust settled, a new chapter was beginning, one that no one could have predicted. Queen Lyra stood on the balcony of her palace, watching the vast sky above her homeworld. The battle had taken everything. But it had also brought something new, something uncertain. The humans. They had come, fought, and left a mark on the galaxy that would not be forgotten. But what did that mean for the future? The human fleet had already begun to leave the Scythian system. Colonel Vance and his crew had completed their mission and were preparing to return to their own territory. But before they left, they had one final meeting with Queen Lyra. Inside the palace, the human delegation sat in a meeting room, the air heavy with tension. The Scythians had been saved, but the humans had made it clear from the beginning that they were not doing this out of kindness. They had fought with a goal in mind: survival. And now, the time had come for the two species to decide what would happen next. Colonel Vance stood at the front of the room, his arms crossed. His expression was serious, but there was a sense of finality in his tone as he spoke. "The battle is over, Your Majesty. The enemy is defeated, but this is not the end. This is just the beginning. The galaxy is a dangerous place. You've seen that firsthand. And we've made it clear that we won't let anyone threaten your people again." Queen Lyra nodded slowly, considering his words. The humans had saved them. There was no doubt about that. But their methods had been harsh, unforgiving. They had shown no mercy, no compassion. For the Scythians, that was hard to accept. They had always believed in peace, in finding ways to solve problems without violence. But the humans were different. They fought to win, and they didn't stop until they had achieved their goal. "We understand that," Queen Lyra said quietly. "You've proven your strength. But now I wonder, what do you expect from us? We are grateful for your help, but you've shown us that you will fight when you need to. Will you always be there for us? Will you help us when the next war comes?" Colonel Vance's eyes hardened. "We fight when we have to, but we're not here to babysit. We've done our part. Now it's time for you to stand on your own." "But we can't stand alone," Queen Lyra replied. "We've seen what happens when we face enemies stronger than us. We need help. We need allies." The silence in the room was thick. The Scythians were proud people, and asking for help had never been easy for them. But the war had shown them that survival often meant forming alliances, even with those they didn't fully understand. Finally, Colonel Vance spoke again, his tone softer this time. "We're not going to abandon you. We're not looking to take control of your people or your planet, but we can offer you something. An alliance, a way for you to survive in this galaxy. We will protect you, but in return, you will help us when the time comes." The words hung in the air. An alliance. It wasn't what Queen Lyra had expected, but it was better than nothing. It was a chance for her people to rebuild, to grow stronger. And perhaps in time, they would understand the humans better. They would learn how to fight, how to survive in this dangerous galaxy. "We agree," Queen Lyra said, her voice steady. "We will join you. We will form an alliance, but we will not forget the lessons we've learned from this war. We will be ready for whatever comes next." The human delegation exchanged looks, nodding in approval. It wasn't the perfect agreement, but it was enough. For now, it was a start, a beginning. The humans had shown the Scythians their strength, but now it was time for the Scythians to show their own. The two species had fought side by side, and though they were different in many ways, they had learned to respect one another. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, and together they might stand a chance against whatever threats lay ahead. As the meeting ended, Colonel Vance and his crew stood up to leave. But before they left the room, Colonel Vance turned to Queen Lyra one last time. "If you ever need us, you know where to find us," he said. "And if anyone threatens you, we'll be there. But remember, the galaxy is full of dangers. You'll need to learn to fight, to survive. You won't always have us." Queen Lyra nodded, a sense of resolve settling over her. "I understand, and we'll be ready." With that, the humans turned and left, their ships lifting off from the surface of the Scythian homeworld. The alliance had been formed, but the future was uncertain. The Scythians had learned much from their human allies, but there was still much to understand. As Queen Lyra watched the human ships disappear into the stars, she knew that this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The galaxy was a dangerous place, but now the Scythians had a chance to survive. They had strength, they had allies, and they were ready to face whatever challenges the future would bring.